Chapter 9 of Age of Innocence picks up with the continuation of a overriding concern with the plot. Archer visits Ellen, and it's clearly a step outside of his familiar environs. He goes way down to the west end of 23rd Street, and it's like he's walking on the moon. The Countess Olenska had said after 5, and at half after the hour, Newland Archer rang the bell of the peeling stucco house with a giant wisteria throttling its feeble cast-iron balcony, which she had hired far down West 23rd Street from the vagabond Medora. You get a sense of, this is a little dicey for Newland. He doesn't really wander outside his settled environment terribly often. And here he is, very punctual, always performing within the rules. He said he would be there at after 5. She said to be there after 5. And he is exactly pushing that to, okay, what is that? It's not before 6, it's after 5. How do you make it? Half after. It's a very clear demarcation point. But the neighborhood is a little dicey, and she lives among a rather bohemian set. There's vague intonations of it being very foreign, very suspect from a conventional society's point of view. Morton notes that her neighbors are largely people who wrote, which is especially amusing coming from a writer like Wharton. The question marks really set it off. There is a sense of Archer is jealous to find Beaufort there. He is a rival for Olenska's hand. So when he steps into the scene, you get the immediate sense that, he's not there, they are out. And you get this little love triangle coming about, this little romantic rivalry, perhaps, even though Archer is not necessarily a romancing Olenska at this point. He seems to feel that, and we as readers are drawn into that dynamic. Morton is clearly holding that out there. They have Olenska and Archer have a nice private talk. Archer warns her about breaking some of the rules of New York society, going out and about with questionable people, going to parties where it's, not really the right sort. She questions the artificiality of everybody's behavior, and she seems frustrated and stultified by the attitudes that she's encountering. She is used to a looser looser culture, let's say, a richer culture. There are a lot of books around her house. There's some images of artists that are relatively new on the scene, and that a proper young gentleman like Newland Archer wouldn't necessarily encounter on his conventional visits to museums. This is really the first truly revealing view of Olenska. She is alone in her own home, and we're getting the sense of the personality. Before this, she's always been seen more in different contexts where she was perhaps behaving in a certain conspicuous way, or we're seeing her more through the eyes of others rather than just for herself. And here she's coming out as a bit of a thorny person her own right. She is a bit ill-tempered sometimes. She's a little bit impulsive. She's a little bit irritated. You can see that crankiness coming out when she's, having to defend or having to excuse her own behavior. Why are people so difficult? Why are people always judging me? there's a little bit of a personality there that hasn't been present before this. So we're getting a nice little view of that. But so is Archer, and he seems befuddled by it. He seems intrigued by it. He seems a little scared of it, to be perfectly honest. Her personality and her independence, I think perhaps most of all, are striking. Newland comes out of that meeting after the Duke arrives. The Duke shows up with a woman who is rather conspicuously attired, you could say, a little garish, certainly common, and you get the sense that, well, this is something the Duke shouldn't be doing either, but he's coming by to collect Olenska and say, hey, let's all go, we're all going to a party, let's go along. And Newland Archer is not about to go with them, and he does not think that she should go either. Olenska should go. But he just excuses himself and he gets out of there. There's that short scene immediately following where Olenska where Newland Archer forgets or remembers that he had forgotten to send a flower. I forget the flowers that he sends to May every morning as a sign of his devotion. And he realizes that for the first time he has forgotten to do so, and it's already early evening. So he goes to a florist and he orders her up some flowers and says, look, he put a good spin on it, and thinks to himself, well, I could have just done this automatically and had a standing order and not thought about it, but this shows that I'm thinking about it every day, and okay, fine. But he also sends some yellow roses to Olenska, first signing his name to the card and then conspicuously, perhaps deviously ripping that card up. He does not necessarily want her to know that he is sending them. So there's something rather illicit going on there. Chapter 10, May and Newland go for a walk in Central Park through the promenade known as Poet's Walk. Then, as now, a beautiful little place for a Sunday stroll. They go there instead of going to church. He is pressing for a shorter engagement. She is holding him off, saying, no, no, no. Mother would be too upset. We have to do things as Mother laid out. These are the rules. These are what we are this is what we are going to do. She wants the conventionally long engagement, one that we are told is can go up to, she points to some friends, can go up to like 2 years, and 2 years. That she is set on, well, no, this is how it is done, and he is saying, well, why do we have to do that? And he's saying, why don't we travel? Let's go to Europe. He seems to be very intrigued with going to Europe all of a sudden. After seeing vaguely Europeanized Olenska, it's a little bit of a curiosity there where his inspiration is coming. A little later on that day, I believe, Newland is back in his room and he's reading, and his sister, who's kind of a busybody, comes in and says that all New York is now scandalized because Olenska was seen at this party with the Duke and common people and eccentrics, and the Vanderladens are suddenly quite scandalized about this, and Henry Vanderladen is in fact going to be talking to her or something, I don't know. And Newland has like no patience for this. He goes downstairs to talk to his mom about it. Henry Vanderladen comes in and he declares that, okay, everything's going to be fine. The Countess Olenska is this was a minor infraction. She got swept up with the Duke, and who can really do anything with royals? But she is given a pass on this. He determines that a kind of blessing from above that is a remarkable sign of the power that he has in this society. Chapter 11, Newland, working as a somewhat indolent lawyer, a gentleman lawyer, gets called into the senior partner's office and is told that he needs to be put on a case. The Countess wants to sue for divorce from her husband back in Europe, and the senior partner is trying to advise against that, and he's basically enlisting Newland to help with that. Archer felt his temper rising. He had been somewhat languidly drifting with events for the last fortnight and letting May's fair looks and radiant nature obliterate the rather importunate pressure of the Mingott claims. But this behest of old Mrs. Mingott's roused him to a sense of what the clan thought they had the right to exact from a prospective son-in-law, and he chafed at the role. He feels pressured by society. He feels pressured by the expectations of his actions. He feels pressured to do something he doesn't want to do, and he wishes for the freedom to just cast it off and say, yeah, I don't want to have to do that. That's, that's not for me. Exactly the sort of freedom that Olenska practices on a regular basis, and he finds himself suddenly like, why can't I do that? He doesn't want to be in the middle of a divorce case, especially among family members or people he knows. Who can blame him? That's an uncomfortable place to be, but this is a sense that, well, okay, this is suddenly starting to, as the word puts it, chafe him, and that's uncomfortable. In going through some of the documents that he's been provided by the partner for this, he finds a letter. Now, we're not given a lot of details about the letter just yet, but it is in this letter, supposedly from the Countess's absentee husband, there is a suggestion of perhaps an illicit affair that might be at the root of their marital problems, or at least part of them. And Newland, while we're not given a lot of specifics, and Newland is kind of reading into it an awful lot, reading, always problematic interpretation, he is presuming a certain moral compromise that is going to come out in this, and he is swung over to the side, whereas before he was kind of waffling, of dissuading divorce, of arguing against it and saying, well, you're already separated by an ocean. What does it matter? Just live your life. And lots of people do this. They're married, but you don't have to see them ever again if you really don't want. But divorce will get scandalous. Divorce will invite some scrutiny into our lives and disrupt things. And the word that he really kind of chokes on is, it will become, and this is the partner who's advising it to him, it will become unpleasant. And that word, he just reacts to. He just doesn't like it. The idea that, unpleasant. Divorce is many things, but should that be really the guiding criteria as to whether or not somebody gets divorced? It will be unpleasant, and for whom? Of course it's going to be unpleasant for the couple, but the imputation seems to be that it will be unpleasant for everybody surrounding them, for the entire New York society. And that seems to be the sticking point. Again, the idea that everybody's supposed to be playing their role very quietly, going along and accepting the rules of this little civilization they have built for themselves. Chapter 12. Chapter 12, we have been buried in the plot, and all of this melodrama, all of this plot, all of this like intrigue, the romantic rivalry, the budding flirtation between these two people, the slowly unpeeling of the public personas to get to character traits within. All of this has been drawing us in, and it's been a while now since we got that extended reverie in book 6 of Newland Archer just sitting alone thinking. But chapter 12 starts out again. Archer walks to Olenska's house. He's going to go talk to her about the prospect of the divorce. And the walk itself is curious. We are told that he leaves his place over on Waverly Place, just north of Washington Square, where he sees all the characters of his little world out and about. It's evening time, it's like 7 p.m. or so, and everybody, he knows what is going on in each one of the houses that he sees. He knows who is out and who is going where, and what regular appointments are being kept, and what parties are being held, and whatever. And he sees the insularity of this, where he knows everybody and everything. And he thinks back to his mother saying, well, it used to be even more so. We knew absolutely everything around us, and anything that wasn't around us, we didn't care about at all. And that sterility, that isolation seems to be curious to him. And he's dwelling on his thoughts as he's walking along. And he jumps from this topic to one of contrasting openness, and that is he starts thinking about Olenska's lifestyle. It's filled with artists and people who write, and ideas and literary connections, and he's comparing the two worlds, and he reflects back to literary connections in his own set. Now remember, his branch of society is supposed to be the more refined, the more cultured. And he can remember with fondness when, when there were writers around in his set, and they were all gentlemen, of course, but they were creative types. They were artists. The contrast with the relative newcomers that he sees celebrated in the rougher environs of Olenska's salon is somewhat striking to him, but he is intrigued. He is getting interested in some of the wilder side of life down 23rd Street. He particularly mentions, who is it? The Goncourt brothers and Joris Karl Huysmans, artists of a somewhat rougher style than his polite little taste would probably allow. Exponents of naturalism and decadence. He is seemingly intrigued by this coarser, perhaps more vital kind of life coming out in the 1870s, coming out of Paris particularly. He's dwelling on this, and soon we're told he's just at Olenska's house. Now, this was curious because his thoughts are tracing this one line, and physically he seems to be, he leaves Waverly Place, and went at the end of the thoughts that are narrated, he's ending up down 23rd Street at her front door, and in between all we have are the thoughts. The stream of consciousness, in essence, marks the distance traveled. The physical distance is of secondary focus. It's just sort of happening. It's just sort of there. The real concern of the narrative at this point is with this mental stream, the stream of consciousness, if you will, and the journey itself it takes on a much more modernist hue. It's not hard to see the modernist underpinnings of this. It makes one think immediately of within the next couple of years, you're going to have famous stream of consciousness strolls coming out of James Joyce in Ulysses and Virginia Woolf in Mrs. Dalloway, where the thought process is much more the focus than the actual physical world. And that seems to be just bursting out of this moment. It is so striking that we're being brought into his thoughts in a very deep way, with just everything else is so tangential, so background, so out of focus. And that's a kind of modernism poking through. Now, we have been with this plot and drawn into the mechanics of the drama in a very exterior mode for several chapters at this point, since chapter 6 with Newland and his study. And it's been much more engaged with dealing with the characters, moving the plot along, keeping readers sort of in this groove. But then you get this little half chapter where you are taken out of that groove and you're just trying to exist kind of independent of it. It's remarkable. It is striking. The having reached Olenska's door, the narrative plunges right back into the plot, and we're back where Beaufort is there, and you get the rivalry and the like. Okay, fine. It's another love triangle of sorts. The conflict come. Beaufort leaves. You get more Newland and Olenska, and that conflict starts to play out. He is trying to get her to admit essentially that what he is interpreting from this mysterious letter, she doesn't necessarily do that. But there is that implication of sex coming out in the letter that is being read, and also in the implication of sex in the scene itself, in the reading of this literature between these two people, that undercurrent of sexuality and vibrancy that we're so starved for in the rest of this world, which is so pale and bloodless. That is coming out in the reading. So you get that dramatic sense in the second half of this chapter that stands in such sharp contrast to the first half. And so the gear shift from one to the other just points out exactly how odd either one is. Again, they could have broken this into different chapters and maybe it would seem less isolated, but the fact that they have both halves of this in there suggests something else going on. It's like Wharton downshifting into the reverie of Newland Archer, the thought process, the stream of consciousness, the modernist vein bursting up through the realist concepts that are being played with aesthetically in the drama, where it is all about the social situation, all about the society, all about the characters, all about the plot. But the more intuitive sense of the narrative that is coming through, the less obvious, the less external, comes out in the stream of consciousness, in the thoughts of Newland. And that that pressure between those two modes of narration is quite striking. Towards the very end of that chapter, we end on a kind of note of opaque yearning. He bent and laid his lips on her hands, which were cold and lifeless. She drew them away, and he turned to the door, found his coat and hat under the faint gaslight of the hall, and plunged out into the winter night, bursting with the belated eloquence of the inarticulate. Eloquence of the Inarticulate sounds an awful lot like Eliot to me, but it's also at the very end of the chapter, kind of a little stinger, a chapter-ending motif that recalls the earlier existentialist tone that pervades that whole first half. It's a neat little tail end leitmotif that points out just what is going on here. It is all a highly constructed document, and even as we get into the drama of it, which seems so superficial and so realistic, it is still somewhat artificial. And you can see again, we're never quite out of then the modernist mode, that the split between styles that she is playing with here, that Wharton is jockeying back and forth in, is like the story itself is trying to maintain an even tone throughout, an even realistic perspective throughout. And every now and then, the modernism is breaking through. It's just bursting through because you can't contain it, because it is something vital. It is something uncontainable. It is the soul of an individual within a stifling environment, where the environment isn't necessarily so powerful to quelch everything. Realism demands that the environment always wins, basically. The rules of realism, like the rules of naturalism in general, say that, well, the environment will always win. Nature always wins. But here you get this conflict, you get this jockeying, where you can see the deep personal anguish of an individual voice within that void, struggling against the suppressive nature of nature. The dissonance between these two modes, it calls attention to these alternative ways of narration, these alternative aesthetic theories. And you can see the real struggle, the real conflict of this book is between realism and the tradition of politely laying out a story that doesn't upset too much, and this bursting through of something more individualized, more inarticulate, more uncertain, that is in the process of cracking through all of the artifice of the realistic tradition.